Constraints, child of. Hey guys, we have a very exciting but also challenging lesson to go through today. We're going to be talking about constraints! Woo! If you're the already experienced animator, you know constraints can be a technical hell to deal with. And if you're new, you're about to find out why. The goal of the next couple of lessons is to get you familiar with how constraints work in Blender, so that hopefully you don't have a hard time. Luckily for us, Blender constraints are a lot easier to use than Maya constraints. They have a lot of options to play around with, and the best part is that they're non-destructible, which means you can easily delete them if something goes wrong and it won't ruin your whole scene like it would in Maya. So as you now know, we can constrain both objects and armatures, aka rig controls, and constraints work pretty much the same for both. They just have two different tabs in the properties menu, so just make sure you're using the correct ones. We will use both in this lesson depending on the example, but let's just get started. We are going to be talking about these three groups of constraints: transform, tracking, and relationship. Some of these constraints are just meant for rigging, or they are so specific that you're probably not going to use them very often at all. We won't go through all of them, but we'll just highlight the ones that you'll likely be using the most as an animator. So first, for those of you who don't know, what is a constraint? Constraint is a relationship between two objects or rigs where one object is the target or parent and the other one is the owner or child. The target is the object you animate, so in this case the hand is the target or the parent, and the target's motion directly affects the owner's movement. So if we move the arm down over here, the ball, which is the child, will move with the arm. In animation, we mostly use constraints when a character picks up an object or something is attached to them. Rather than trying to match the motion of the two on every single frame, which is not something you really want to do, you can just constrain the object to the rig, and then that object will just follow the rig and you don't have to keep keying it. It's similar to parenting, which we've done by selecting one object, selecting a second, and then pressing Control P, object, and now for example this object becomes the parent, and so rotating and scaling this object will result in the other object, the child, doing the same thing. Now the issue with just parenting, with Control P, is that it's very useful if you want to keep two objects attached the whole time, but it comes with a lot of limitations. For example, if you need to do something complex like turning off the constraint and turning it back, or moving this object for a few frames and then having it not attached to the parent, that becomes kind of impossible to do with just Control P. This is where constraints come into play, so let's finally get to them. So first we're going to talk about the child of constraint, because I find that I use it the most in my shots, and Simona made this very nice animation for us to use in our example today, which we also included it in the lesson for you to follow along with, which I suggest you do, because this lesson is very technical and hard to grasp if you're just watching it and you're not actually following along. So when you first select the ball, select the main controller, ball rig main, and you go to the bone constraint properties, you see that we have a child of constraint. And as we scrub, you can see that the influence goes from 1 to 0 and then back to 1 again. This is how you key constraints on and off in Blender. So let's play this one more time. So while it's following Max's hand, the influence is at 1. Once he lets go, it's 0. And once he catches it again, it's back to 1 again. Now let's go ahead and delete this entirely. And as you notice, the ball just kind of pops out of place here. So we have some animation on the ball here, but during the period that it was constrained, nothing is happening to the ball anymore because we got rid of that constraint. And this is what I meant before when I said it's non-destructive. That didn't screw up the rest of our animation. It just made it so that the ball isn't constrained on the frames where it was constrained. All right, so let's go ahead and actually delete all of our keys here because we want to start from scratch. So I'm selecting everything, pressing delete. I'm going to come to frame 1 and let's start from scratch. So I'm going to zero out let you guys see this. I'm going to zero out the location by pressing Alt G. And I'm going to zero out the rotation by pressing Alt R. I'm going to leave the scale because I scaled the ball down for this example, so I'm not going to touch the scale. Okay, so what we're going to do is using the main controller on the ball, I'm going to bring it up into Max's hand. So let's go ahead and do that. Make sure that it's not clipping from any direction. Okay, let's say that's good enough. So this is our frame 1. And I'm gonna make sure to set a key by pressing I. Now what you want to do is, again, with the main controller selected, that's the big square right here, we're going to go to Bone Constraint Properties, press Add Bone Constraint, and choose the Child of constraint in the Relationship tab. So Child of, and right away we're hit with this. Now, nothing has happened yet because we've added the constraint, but you can see the picture here is red. The constraint icon is red. That means it's not connected to anything. There's a constraint node here, but we haven't connected the node to anything else. So how we do this is we say we want the target to be, you can click on the eye drop. We want the target to be max rig. Now a new bar here showed up for us, which tells us to select the bone. So now we're saying target max rig, and for max rig, choose this bone. Here you type out the name of the bone that you actually would like to constrain to. So in our case, it's going to be the hand constrain left. And that is this controller right here. So we have a controller made specifically for constraining. I'll show you how to turn that on in a second. But we got to talk about the elephant in the room, or lack thereof. Our ball disappeared. We constrained it to this controller on the hand, and our ball disappeared. Not to worry, all that happened is that Blender now thinks that the entire time the ball has been constrained to this controller, and that's not the case. So we're going to press Set Inverse, and that brings the ball back. Also, now if you guys pay attention, the Child of Constraint icon is now white and it's not red anymore, which means it is active. Now just to backtrack and to show you again how to turn this controller on if you don't see it, this one right here, we created this controller inside of Max's hand so that you can constrain things to it, like the sword or the gun or a ball or anything else. The benefit of this is that once you constrain it to this, the constraint controller follows the hand, but at the same time you can select that controller and animate it on top of your animation. So now we have a separate controller that's connected to the hand, that follows the hand, but you can animate it separately. And to turn it on, you just go to the gear, you press N, and in items and in properties, you can turn on the constraint target. So this turns it off and on. We want it on. Now let's close this back up. And let's get back to our constraint video. Now, if you're choosing the bone name here and you don't know the name of the bone, you can actually just go back to your rig and click on the controller, and in the top left, you're able to read what that rig is called, or what that controller is called. So in this case, this is the hand_IKL. If you wanted to constrain to the hand, for us, we chose the hand constraint target L. All right, let's go back to our ball again. So here in our ball's constraint menu, you have the option to kind of modify your constraint. You can say, right now we have everything active, but you can turn off location. So what that means is now when we move our arm, the ball won't actually move, but if we rotate it, the ball will rotate, and if we scale it, the ball will scale. Because we told it not to follow the target's location, only follow rotation and scale. But we're just going to turn everything back on. This is just super cool because it adds kind of versatility to the tool. It lets you modify it in any way you want. For example, you can make it so it doesn't rotate with the arm. It disappeared, but you can press Set Inverse and it'll come back. But we're going to go ahead and Control Z that. And of course, the same applies to scale. So what you need to do next is that make sure this is keyed. If it's yellow like this, that means it's keyed. If it's not, you can press I on it. Or you can press the diamond button, which is a circle. So once it turns to a diamond, it means it's keyed, and it'll actually show up here in your graph editor as a controller, as a channel. So when it's not keyed, we have no keys on the influence and it's not there. But when it is, it pops up in the bottom left. Also, let's make sure that we set a key on all the attributes just in case. on our ball. And now when we press play on our animation, let's turn off the controllers. When we press play, we see that the ball kind of sticks in Max's hand and doesn't actually go off, come off, and it just follows the hand. Okay, so let's figure out which frame the ball actually leaves the hand. In our case, I'd say frame 14 probably. So let's go to frame 13. And I am going to make sure that we're in pose mode, and I'm going to make sure that I set keys on my attributes. And I'm going to set a key on the influence by either pressing the diamond, the empty diamond, or press I with my cursor on the attribute. So I press I, we set another key, as you guys can see here. Now on frame 14, we are going to turn off the influence. So one thing to keep in mind with constraints is that you always want to turn them off and on within one frame. So you don't want to have a frame with 0.5 influence or 0.3 influence, because influence is that. It's the influence of the constraint, is to control the constraint over the object. If the influence is like 0.5, that means it's kind of following the constraint, but it's kind of not. And there's really no use case for it unless you're rigging a character. So you always want to have one frame where it's 1 and the next frame it's 0, or vice versa. Another thing you guys noticed is that after we turned off the influence, the ball kind of popped out of place and went back to where it was in frame 1. This is because when an object is constrained, the channel box values aren't actually changing. So when the ball is moving here, if you guys pay attention to the channel box, those attributes that belong to the ball aren't moving at all. The ball is just borrowing the movement from the hand, and it's not changing its own values. So when we take the borrowing off and it's not borrowing values anymore, it goes back to the one value that it had, which is these. So it just kind of like pops back to those attributes because it's not borrowing any other movements. This is what can make constraints super frustrating, but don't worry, there are several ways around this and we're going to cover all of them. The first one would be the dynamic constraint add-on, which we will cover in a separate video in the advanced Blender basic section. It's a great little add-on and a great little tool that automatically matches the position of the object when you turn the constraint off. But there are ways to do this without add-ons as well, don't worry. So for the second method, let's go ahead and delete all the stuff we just did so it's still constrained. And here's what you need to do. Again, make sure you set keys on the ball, set keys on the controller, and set keys on the influence. Make sure there's a key on the frame before you unconstrain. Now, when you want to unconstrain, go to the next frame. So frame 14, this is where we want the ball not to follow the hand anymore. And instead of turning off the influence, press the X button right here. Now, as you guys notice, the influence did turn to 0, but these attributes also changed and everything's orange. So everything that's orange, go ahead and press I on it. So I'm going to hover over the attributes, press I to set keys, because right now there's a temporary change. So when you press I on it, you kind of confirm that change and you set a key. So now when we go to this frame, the ball is still in the same place, but when we move the arm, it's not constrained to the arm anymore. We go one frame beforehand, it's still constrained. Okay, so now we can animate the ball freely. So let's figure out which frame the ball lands back in the hand again. And I'm gonna say frame 30. So let's move the ball to where the hand is on frame 30. Right? Let's set a key on the influence and all the attributes, make sure there's keys on it. And now we have the ball in the hand in frame 30 and we have the ball in the hand in frame 14. So whatever is in between is for us to animate. So now we can just go to frame, let's say 24, and say the ball is all the way up here. And now when we press play, the ball goes up, comes down. But what we need to do is on frame 31, the frame after 30, we bring the influence back to 100%. And as you notice, the ball's kind of in the air again. Well, that's because we need it to be the same value as before. So frame 1 and frame 13, when we still had the constraint on. Let's copy these keyframes. So Control C, come to frame 31, where we want the constraint again, and Control V. And there we go. So now when we press play, we have something like this. All right, so that was a lot, I know. And we kind of went back and forth, and that might have been confusing. So for your sake, I'm going to quickly just do this from scratch really fast, and I'll just mention what I'm doing as I'm doing it, just so you have a clear idea of what's happening. So we bring our ball into the palm of our hand, and we go to the frame right before the ball is unconstrained. So we're gonna set another key, make sure the influence is keyed again, go to the frame you want to unconstrain, press the X, set keys on everything, and then we figure out which frame the ball is back in the hand. So in our case, that will be frame 30, where the ball is back in the hand. I'm gonna go ahead and move the ball while it's unconstrained. Let's say that's good enough. So set a key on everything again, make sure influence is keyed again by pressing I on it. Now we want to copy the last keyframe we had where the ball was still constrained, because we want all the attributes and we want the influence. So copy that and paste it on the frame we want the ball to be constrained again. So Control V. All right, now we just need the in-between animation of the ball. You can make it as pretty as you want, but I'm just doing it for an example here. Bring it all the way up here while the ball is unconstrained, right? And that's it. Let's press play, and there you go. It's really quick. It's just very hard to explain, and it's a hard concept to grasp and get a hang of. So definitely practice this. We'll show you other methods of constraining and different reasons you would be using them. But let's end the video here because it's already pretty long, and we'll continue with the other constraint types in the next one.